I'd like to start by going over two simple reasons to not make fun of others regarding the context of the oppressive hierarchical society we live in. Firstly, a lot of the ways that making fun of others is done involves quite explicit ableism, misogyny, and other types of bigotry. For example, the word pussy, when used in a derogatory way meaning coward or something similar, simply perpetuates a misogynistic attitude given its association with women. It is a word with a negative connotation that is attached to women. Thus, it perpetuates a patriarchal idea that being a woman is inferior. It simply reinforces the misogynistic attitude of our society in every instance it is used in a derogatory manner. Calling someone insane, stupid, and the like when you disagree with an opinion they hold is perpetuating the ableist or sanist attitude that those who are neurodivergent or have a mental disorder do not need to be treated like equals, but instead their status as someone who is not neurotypical means that they should be subordinate to the opinions and the directions of those who are, and that their opinions are not worth listening to because they are disabled. Even calling someone a bastard has its roots in patriarchy. So many insults in our culture, if not all of them, are insults because they are associated with an oppressed group of people. If one desires the abolition of oppression, then insults like these can't be used. Even if the words are not used with the intention of legitimizing hierarchy or oppression, them being seen as insults in and of themselves while having connections to groups of people causes them to imply the inferiority of the group of people the insult is connected to. Let's use a hypothetical to explain this. Say one person said, "You are an elf," to another. This sentence is value neutral. It being seen as negative or positive depends on how one views the term elf. What the term elf is associated with causes the sentence to have a value. If being an elf is good, then the sentence is a compliment. If bad, then an insult. If neutral, then it's just a confusing thing to say to another. If this sentence is seen as an insult, it means that being an elf is associated with bad things, either by the individuals or the cultural standard they are both living in. If the statement is intended to be an insult by the person who stated it, then this person is applying or reinforcing the connection between elves and inferiority. If the insulter were to talk explicitly, they would say something like, "You are an elf, and being an elf is inferior." If calling someone an elf is seen as an insult, then elves themselves must be seen as inferior by the culture these people are in. If elves are seen as inferior, then using the term elf as an insult is reinforcing this cultural standard and thus contributing to the oppression of elves. Insulting someone in such a way invokes oppression and hierarchical standards. A word is an insult because it is seen as being bad to be that thing. So if an insult is connected to a group of people, it is an insult that perpetuates a perceived inferiority of that group of people. Insulting people in this way is not compatible with fighting oppression. Secondly, making fun of someone tends to involve pointing out how they do not meet a societal standard. Within the context of a hierarchical society that includes white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and the like, this is of course problematic. If you are to point out that someone is not meeting a standard that is set by our hierarchical society, then you are invoking the hierarchical standard and are playing a role in enforcing these standards on people. Beauty standards, for example, exist within the context of cis-normative gender standards, white supremacy, ableism, and the like, which all play a role in what is and isn't seen as beautiful. Body shaming requires upholding the standards of beauty that have been set by our hierarchical society, as it is just pointing out that someone is not meeting a standard around appearance, a standard set by white supremacy, patriarchy, ableism, and the like. To body shame someone is to invoke these oppressive systems and engage in the enforcement of these standards. To make fun of someone who is not meeting a standard set by our hierarchical society is to perpetuate the use of these standards, and if you wish to abolish these oppressive standards or oppression as a whole, then you should not engage in behavior that perpetuates or reinforces them. These two reasons are effectively that these instances of making fun of others is reliant on the systems of oppression that we live in, and that making fun of others in this way is perpetuating these oppressive systems rather than fighting against them. So clearly, I hope, upholding the standards of our current society is pretty bad as it perpetuates current hierarchical oppression, but I think that making fun of someone is hierarchical even in the absence of the hierarchical society we currently live in. If you make fun of someone for something, you are setting a standard of how people should act, think, or be like, and enforcing this standard on others. Of course, as explained previously, doing this currently involves invoking current hierarchical standards, But even in the absence of these oppressive standards, making fun of someone would still involve the creation of a hierarchy. Even if it is not intentional, when you make fun of someone for something, you are effectively trying to change someone's behavior as you are punishing them for behaving a certain way. So when you make fun of someone, you are trying to get them to conform to your own standards rather than the standards they have themselves. Making fun of people for being different, I think, stems from the logic of cultural genocide, or more accurately, cultural supremacy, but explaining this is beyond the scope of this essay. I understand culture to be a combination of ways of doing, like cooking, clothing, language, games, and things like that, and ways of thinking, like beliefs, attitudes, and values, that are passed on from person to person or generation to generation, things that are taught and things that are learned. To give a scenario to justify this claim that making fun of others stems from the logic of cultural genocide, say there is a community of 200 people who all share a same culture. Around 15 people start dressing in a different way. They're creating their own culture around how they dress. If the other 185 people were to make fun of the 15 for dressing differently, then they are suppressing the culture that the 15 are in the process of developing and creating. They're not viewing the two different ways of going about dressing as equal. Instead, they are viewing their way of dressing as superior and the 15's culture as inferior. They are effectively trying to kill this new culture, assimilate the 15 back into the dominant culture, and stop others from participating in this new culture, as well as creating other divergent cultures. And they're doing this by making fun of them, making them feel shame, embarrassment, and the like. They're not trying to convince people to dress as they do via logical arguments or reason, and have the 15 freely choose to dress the same way as them. Instead, they're trying to coerce them into changing their behavior. I think I'm correct in saying that setting a standard and getting others to conform to it via coercion, which I think making fun of others is a form of, is engaging in cultural genocide via the suppression of other cultures. Another point is, if someone is doing something that gets in the way of the freedom and equality of another or others, making fun of them is not the way one should, at the very least initially, go about mending the situation. This is because people need to be able to think for themselves regarding the decisions they make. When someone does the thinking for another, they are effectively an authority figure to the person they are doing the thinking for. If one cannot think for themselves, but is instead dependent on others to do the thinking for them, they cannot make decisions for themselves, but instead have to subordinate themselves to some authority figure. Making fun of someone relates to this, as it is not trying to change the way someone acts by changing their view of a situation, their logic, beliefs, etc. It is trying to change someone's actions by making them feel shame or embarrassment, and not explaining why they should feel these feelings for the actions they are doing or how they are being. Making fun of someone is effectively communicating, you should feel shame for being this or acting in this way because being or acting in this way is bad, but not saying why, not providing an actual reason. This effectively makes either yourself, your standards, or some cultural standards an authority figure in the life of the person you are making fun of. So, if someone is doing something that is harming another, making fun of them as a way to change their behavior is tackling the issue by creating a new hierarchy between you and the person doing harm, rather than simply getting rid of the hierarchy between the person causing harm and their victim. If someone is harming another, ideally the way to go about it is to change the beliefs, attitudes, values, view of the situation of the perpetrator so they stop harming another via their own volition. Making fun of someone as the first way to try to stop someone causing harm does not allow this, and instead leads to ends of someone or a group of people having power over others. By positive freedom, I refer to the ability to do what you want to do, be who you want to be, act how you want to act. Freedom meaning adding opportunity to your life. When making fun of someone, you are effectively punishing them for acting, thinking, or being a certain way. You are trying to get them to associate a negative feeling with something they are doing or something they are. You are also effectively telling this person that if they act a certain way or for being a certain way, you are going to cause them mental harm. This is not consistent with having solidarity with another's positive freedom. As long as what someone is doing is in solidarity to others, it is fine for them to be doing that, and trying to get them to stop via making fun of them is not having solidarity with them. In fact, it is consistent with valuing solidarity to encourage people to engage in their positive freedom, so they feel more comfortable in expressing themselves, no matter how cringe you think it is. Making fun of someone results in reducing how comfortable someone is in expressing themselves, and getting this person to think things like, I will be made fun for this, before they start doing something they want to do. Causing people to go through something like this is simply anti-freedom. Maybe you wanted to learn how to draw as an adult, but being bad at drawing is seen as embarrassing, so you don't learn. Maybe there is some other hobby you want to engage in, but you don't because you'd be mocked for it. Maybe you are queer and feel a sense of fear when thinking about being visibly queer. Situations like this, where you have been conditioned to not do something because of a societal standard, is an assault on your freedom, specifically your ability to express or engage in your freedom. I'm sure that to some degree every single person has conditioned limitations on their ability to express themselves, self-imposed limitations on their freedom. On top of this, the people who see you make fun of the other person will also see that you are causing harm to someone for acting or being a certain way, which will go into these observers' decision-making regarding how they act and how they express their own freedom. A culture where people make fun of others is a culture where no one is expressing their ability to do things, to be who they want to be, to act how they want to act at their fullest extent. It is a culture where people are passive in their freedom rather than assertive. A culture of making fun of people is a culture that is anti-freedom. It is a culture where people are coerced into acting in socially accepted ways rather than how they truly wish to act. Causing harm to someone mentally is seen as less violent or not violent at all in our hierarchical society. However this attitude has come about, I do not think it is an attitude that should be kept in a liberated society. I do not think that mental harm should be viewed as lesser to physical harm as it is in our current society. I know that mental harm can lead to physiological changes in someone's body, but in this section I am talking about mental harm in isolation to follow-on physical effects. Why shouldn't we view mental harm as being just as bad as physical harm? What actually does justify viewing physical pain as being worse than depression, shame, embarrassment, anxiety, trauma, etc. in all instances? You can beat someone to death and you can bully someone to suicide. I think that viewing physical harm as greater requires a justification, and that it is currently seen as greater due to the values of our hierarchical society, rather than through reasoning, and therefore as people who seek to end oppression, this is something we should think about. Like how being hit in the leg fairly hard can cause you to walk or move around differently to how you normally would, someone giving you an insecurity can cause you to act differently than how you would without it. Harming someone physically can lead to them becoming physically disabled or needing rehabilitation, and being made fun of or bullied can lead to long-term or lifelong insecurities, depression, anxiety, etc. I think that causing mental harm to someone should be viewed on the same level as physical harm generally. Of course, having a limb chopped off is not as bad as being mocked for your style, but being lightly punched is not as bad as being traumatized. What makes an instance of physical harm greater or lesser than mental harm is the degree of harm caused. The nature of it being physical or mental, I think, is not an important factor in quantifying the harm. And overall, I think mental harm is severely undervalued in our society, and this is a cultural perspective that I think needs to change. The most important part of anarchist political philosophy is the concept of means-ends unity, and I think this concept provides a solid justification for not making fun of others. Means-ends unity refers to the idea that the methods a political movement uses will reflect the ends it arrives at, that the way people act today will lead to how they act tomorrow. We currently live in a culture where making fun of others is tolerated and seen as normal. Every instance of making fun of others reinforces this cultural norm, right? If no one made fun of others, then it would be abnormal to make fun of others. The more people who make fun of others and don't speak out against it, the more normalized making fun of others is. If you help maintain, perpetuate, and reinforce a cultural standard, you are aiding in this cultural standard existing in the future. As I have stated throughout this essay, there are many issues regarding making fun of others if you value liberation, anti-oppression, whatever. So if how a culture acts today leads to how it acts in the future, we should try to change how we act today so we can live in a liberated culture in the future. So if your ideal world is one where all are free, equal, and bound in solidarity, do you really want to be acting in a way that contributes to a future society where people are not all free, equal, and not bound in solidarity? The cultures and societies of the future will be the result of the cultures and societies of the present. In order to create a culture that has its basis in freedom, equality, and solidarity, we must start acting consistently with these values in the present. And as I have hopefully argued sufficiently, making fun of people is not consistent with this, at least in the instances I have argued in this essay. So if you are going to make fun of someone, ask yourself, is this consistent with how I think people should act in my ideal society? Is this how people in my ideal society would respond to this situation? I think this is most clear in examples where people make fun of others they disagree with. How do you want people to respond to others they disagree with? Given that I think people should think for themselves, I believe that if one disagrees with another, they should explain the disagreement and try to convince the other person where they are wrong, not make fun of them, which is common in our current culture. For me and my values, making fun of others does not reflect ends I aspire to in the vast majority of situations where people make fun of others in our current society, so I'm not going to reinforce these norms around making fun of others in our culture. These two examples are not completely in line with making fun of people, but they both relate to issues I have brought up in the essay thus far. They just apply my arguments in slightly different contexts. For context, the left liberal streamer Hassan Piker interviewed the estranged trans daughter of Elon Musk, who, as you can probably imagine, had a lot of negative things to say about her father during the interview. The use of the word insane here is problematic. For one, it is simply not accurate. In the quoted tweet, Ian is being disingenuous, lying, trying to change or control the narrative. These are things that people of all mental cognitions are capable of doing and do. In saying that the way Ian is acting is insane rather than how he is actually acting, it is perpetuating the association between atypical cognitions with traits that are not actually associated with them. Part of the reason why mentally disabled people are treated so poorly is due to negative characteristics being falsely associated with them, which this quote tweet is doing. Part of ableist culture is scapegoating all bad people as being secretly disabled or attributing all evil acts as being done by people who are atypical or not of the cultural standard. Every evil person is seen to be a psychopath, deranged, insane, from an evil culture, etc. Using the word insane in response to Ian being incredibly disingenuous perpetuates ableism and ableist culture. If you are someone that uses ableist language to refer to others doing things like being disingenuous, I have a very simple question to ask you. Do you want to play a role in having disabled people be associated with the things you use words like insane for? Another thing about this tweet I want to point out is that the author of the tweet does not think calling Ian an accurate term like liar, disingenuous, etc. is how they should go about expressing their disagreement with Ian. Instead, they think calling him insane is better. I believe that this is because in our society and culture, calling someone a liar or disingenuous is not particularly impactful or insulting. No one really cares. While calling someone insane, stupid and the like carries much more weight and is seen as far more insulting, which is why ableist terms are more common than accurate terms when calling out people one doesn't like. The fact that insane carries more weight as an accusation than disingenuous is due to the standards of our hierarchical society. When this person decided to call Ian's framing of the situation insane rather than disingenuous, they were pandering to the standards of current society to mock Ian rather than to standards consistent with anti-oppression. If we lived in a culture that viewed being disingenuous as being worse than being disabled, I'm sure the quote tweeter would have used the word disingenuous rather than the word insane to dunk on Ian. The first issue I have with this is that the word bitch is used in a derogatory way, meaning that it is being used to attach a negative connotation to someone. Bitch is also a gendered insult connected to women, so using it in a derogatory way is playing into misogyny. Secondly, in bitch being a gendered term that is being attached to a non-binary person, it is effectively assigning a gender to someone who does not want to be gendered in that way. To gender someone in this way is to reinforce the gender binary and thus patriarchy. Thirdly, bitch specifically is a feminine gendered term, and that choice I think perpetuates a patriarchal narrative or myth that women cheat more than men. It at least plays into the myth that the default for cheating is feminine. It is also associating work with femininity, while framing work to be something that is bad. These implicities all perpetuate hierarchical standards, primarily patriarchy. It is perpetuating the gender binary and the association between femininity and negative personality characteristics. This joke relies on hierarchical oppression in order for it to work, and thus it perpetuates hierarchical oppression to some degree. This example, I think, is really good at showing how rooted in oppression making fun of others and joking often is. I doubt that the person who made the joke was intending to perpetuate misogyny. However, common insults and language customs in our language are misogynistic and can be so subtly, which shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone given how many centuries the culture we have lived in has been misogynistic. It has affected the way we speak. Hopefully the arguments I've made during this essay have convinced you that if you are someone who wants to fight against oppression, you need to give far more thought to making fun of others than you likely currently do.